Hi and welcome back to the Incite My Life channel. So today we're going to be going over the Exam P published questions from the Society of Actuaries. So you can see here we're going to be going over question 327. So if you haven't already read it, here's the question. So take a moment to pause the video if you need to and reread this question. And then we're going to go ahead and get started here. So the first thing that I like to do when I approach a question like this is I like to think, well, what is actually being charged here? So the question says that 100% of the cost of fillings, and 70% of the cost of root canals. So 100% of the cost of fillings, so that's 100% of $50 is the full $50. And root canals is 70%. So 70% of 500 is actually 350. So now we have an idea of what's actually, where the cash flow is actually moving, how it's actually looking. But now we want to also think, well, how often is this actually occurring? So in the problem itself, it's given us a table. So you can see the number of fillings from 0 to 3 with the respective probabilities, and same thing for root canals. So remember that for a discrete table of values, the expectation then is to take the values and multiply by the respective probability. So the expected fillings then would be 0 times 0.60 plus 1 times 0.20, etc. And the same rule applies for root canals. So you can see we get an expected filling rate of 0.65 and an expected root canal rate of 0.20. So now that we have the total charges, or what's actually being charged, and we know how often they're occurring, now we can move on to an aggregate level of what is actually going to be charged, or what is the expectation of the severity and the frequency. So this is the expected aggregate charges. So aggregate just means, it's frequency put together with severity. So frequency being how often it occurs, or an event occurs, and severity being, how you can kind of think of it as how severe is the occurrence. So for example, if you have like an auto policy, you may have some accidents that occur, but not all accidents occur with the same amount of damage. So some may be a small little fender bender, and others might be a complete loss. So the frequency is how often that's occurring, and the severity is how bad. You can kind of think of it that way. That's kind of how I like to think of it. So anyway, with the expected aggregate charges, we're looking at the expected aggregate fillings plus the expected aggregate root canals. So you can see I've noted it as S underscore fillings and S underscore root canals. So S is the sum of these charges. So you can see where I say aggregate charges S is equal to x1 plus x2. So x just represents the charges. So S is the sum of these different charges. So for fillings and for root canals. So we have to go back and remember that our expected value of two random variables is basically just the expected value of one random variable plus the expected value of the other random variable. And since we're just putting together our frequency and our severity for fillings and root canals, you can see that we have 0.65 times 50, the probability times the charge, plus the probability times the charge to give us a final value of 102.5.